I'm joined this afternoon by Captain Dan Hanley of an organisation called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers. Their website is 911pilots.org, and we're going to be discussing today all things to do with the aeronautical piloting evidence surrounding the 9/11 attack and the concerns over the official narrative and the search for truth. So, Dan, if you could perhaps give us initially a brief introduction as to who you are and how you came to be questioning the official 9/11 narrative.
Okay, David. I currently serve as a director and international public spokesperson for this global grassroots effort called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers, whose purpose is to show that the aircraft were electronically hijacked by a system called the Uninterruptible autopilot that remotely takes control of the aircraft's autopilot and flight management computers and drives the aircraft to their target. And once this system is engaged, the pilots can no longer disconnect the autopilot, and they've lost control of the airplane.
And Dan, so what your personal backstory and experience? What is that?
Okay, I commenced flying over 50 years ago in 1968. First as a civilian pilot, going to a junior college where I achieved my private commercial instrument and multi-engine rating by 1970 before going on to Southern Illinois University to get a math degree. And I did fly during that time frame as well. And when I graduated in 1973, the Vietnam War was going on, and I had to make service plans, so I chose naval aviation. And after flying 3 different training aircraft, I flew the 4-engine P-3 Orion aircraft that was used to track Soviet submarines during the Cold War. And in 1978, I was hired by United Airlines as a pilot. And over the course of the next 25 years, I flew 7 different aircraft, accruing over 20,000 flight hours over a career span of 35 years. So that's my experience.
Well, yeah, that's what you would call comprehensive in terms of pilot experience. So
Yeah.
from the point of view of someone who's got that degree of flight experience on large aircraft, 4-engined aircraft, and you came to the 9/11 story.
Yeah.
And how did you react to what you were being told in the official narrative?
Well, I was a 777 Boeing 777 captain out of New York on 9/11, and I was at Newark that day and saw the buildings smoldering in the south end of Manhattan. Like everyone else, my knee-jerk reaction was that we were under attack. But over a period of time, I began to see holes in the aviation safety and security system, which led me to believe it was a farce and that we really weren't secure on board aircraft. And I was receiving a lot of pressure from flight crew to say something about some of the promises they had made us but didn't keep as far as security, which I did. And I could spend a whole program talking about this, but ultimately I was medically grounded illegally in 2003 for speaking out about these issues. And over the course of 5 years, I took it to the government, to the Transportation Department, the FAA, Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice, and they closed my case without interviewing a single witness or reviewing any evidence. But when the reports start coming out about the inexperience of these pilots, that's what did it for me. I could not believe, having flown Cessna aircraft myself, and then having flown the 757, 767, and then finding out they never had any training on those aircraft, I couldn't believe the official story. So that's when the big question mark came in. And it wasn't until a pilot named Captain Phil McConnell, which we can talk about later, introduced me to the Uninterruptible autopilot in 2006. That was my aha moment. That's how they did it. So in that essence,
So to look at the difference between, I've never flown anything, right? But the nearest I've been to flying is in a small aircraft, island hopping. So I'm next to the pilot, right?
Okay.
the level of difference, if you had some ability to fly a Cessna, right, and you were then presented with the cockpit of a commercial airliner, just give some indication of the scale of problem that would be presented with anyone asked to do that. I mean, how is it? How would they react?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because on our website, 911pilots.org, there's a menu and there's a drop down on it. And if you go to cockpits, what we did was a photographic comparison of a Cessna 172 cockpit to that of a 767. And if you look at the 172, and the 172 is their primary training aircraft, a light single engine airplane. And if you look at the photograph, you'll see the old round dial instruments. You see a few knobs, a few radios, and a few light switches. And then if you scroll down and look at the 767 cockpit and how immense it is, and the fact that they have CRT displays for their instrument panel, and these flight management computers that are the primary navigation system for the airplane, that these guys wouldn't have an idea how to operate, or how. And you have to ask yourself, okay, from the point of the airplane being hijacked to the point of impact of the airplane, if that happened, how did they navigate? It surely wasn't with these flight management computers. So from a pilot's perspective, it's absurd to think that they could have hopped in these airplanes sight unseen and have flown them. And I believe the reason that 99% of the global population fell for the story is they're not pilots, and they cannot conceive of the absurdity of this ludicrous notion.
Yeah, so we're talking about taking someone who might have trained on a typewriter and given them a mainframe computer and say, well, just the same, get on with it. Is that is a complete technological leap? They wouldn't even have the starting point to cope.
No. As a matter of fact, when we profile the hijackers on the website, we use this analogy, which wasn't original. We heard it and thought it was appropriate. But the pinpoint accuracy for these pilots to have hit those targets on their first attempt would be akin to climbing in a large semi-tractor trailer that you've never driven before, get it up to 500 miles per hour and try to drive it through a Jiffy Lube or a garage without scraping the sides of the truck. That's how absurd the story is. And a lot of people say, well, all they have to do is eyeball it. All they have to do is look at a building, point, and go. Well, it's not that simple. Those buildings may have looked large, but those pilots hit it with pinpoint accuracy. And most people aren't aware that the navigation systems on the airplane are derived from cruise missile technology. They're extremely accurate. So when the uninterruptible autopilot kicks in, yeah, it would have been possible for it to have been done with that, but not with these guys flying.
Now, you've obviously run into career difficulties because of speaking the truth,
right?
And I'm very sorry that has happened. The medical examining, I'm assuming it was a psychological examination that was used.
Yes, it was.
And this is a long and tried and trusted technique of totalitarian regimes of silencing dissent, because you simply define dissent as insanity, and then you can use all the draconian powers that the psychiatric profession can bring to bear to make sure that the opposition is no longer around to speak its mind.
This is Joe Stalin's tactic. It was called psychopathological methods of dissent, where he would take dissenters and throw them into an insane asylum to discredit them. So that's how far back this goes, and it's a common practice, not just within the airline industry, but within other industries and agencies of government as well.
Yes, I remember when discovering that the Soviet version of the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual used in the West for psychiatric conditions, actually had a recognized psychiatric condition that was denying the obvious achievements of the Soviet Union. So if you complained about there not being any toilet paper in the stores, you were defined by definition. You were insane, and this was how it was done. So yeah, this is a as you say a tried and trusted, long-standing means of silencing opposition. Now, my own background is I'm a structural engineer. I have spoken out about 9/11 on several occasions. Haven't suffered what you've suffered, but I have had a bit of shall we say pushback from other people in the profession who have not liked this approach, and who are unsettled by it, or who have a desire to support the official narrative. I think because the implications of the official narrative being a lie are very hard for people to face, because it then removes a lot of things that are central beliefs in their life, and this is difficult to do. So as I was raising structural issues to do with the 9/11 collapse and trying to keep the discussion on technical structural grounds, what would happen would be other engineers would come and they would ask me about explosives, or how explosives would be smuggled in, or they'd ask me about the planes. So the conversation was always getting pulled off of the area I was trying to discuss and put into other areas. But on the planes, one of the things that I remember raising was the speed, not just the accuracy of the planes, and not just the miraculous ability of the incompetent Cessna trained pilots, but the actual speed of the aircraft as they came in. Right. So perhaps you could explore that for us and talk about what the actual speed and altitude was, and how this compares to what you would have experienced and what's normally feasible.
Well, according to radar data and other information obtained through the Freedom of Information Act from the NTSB and other agencies, the speed at which these aircraft were clocked exceeded the maximum operating speed of a Boeing 757 and 767 at sea level by about 120 to 140 knots. And according to most aircraft structural engineers, the aircraft should have come apart. So that leads you to believe, what was it that was flying that day? Or according to Phil McConnell and an author named Rebecca Roth, there was an airborne swap of airplanes, and perhaps another aircraft or airborne vehicle was replaced with the hijacked planes with passengers on them.
So would you say that the speed at least brings into question whether it was actually the planes that were claimed, whether they could have even done that?
That's correct.
Okay.
If you look, there's a photograph out there of United 175 hitting the South Tower of the Pentagon, and there are 4 independent photos that were taken, 1 by CNN and 3 by other independent photographers, and all 4 of them show a pod on the bottom of the aircraft. Now, the bottom of a 767 is smooth, and that pod is present, and there have been people saying, well, it's a reflection of the sun on the aircraft, it was Photoshop, or it was a shadow from the engine. But according to what I read, a Spanish photography expert analyzed these photos and said, no, the pod was there. So if you believe that those photos were of United 175, it wasn't that airplane. It was not a 767 because it doesn't have that pod on the bottom.
In terms of debris recovered, was there any clues from the various crash sites?
No, you look at 911pilots.org doesn't really get into this because their focus is on attacking the hijackers and the official narrative in that regard. But if you look at Shanksville, minimal debris, none at the Twin Towers, and only a few airplane parts that were picked up, and some people say they were placed there at the Pentagon. So there's the absence of airplane parts as well.
And just before we get back to kind of the core area that your organization covers, briefly say a few words about the Pentagon, if you would. I mean, I was struck by, on the subject of the ability of the hijackers to fly the plane. I was struck by the performance of whatever hit the Pentagon as it came down, because it came down in this spiral to come in exactly parallel with the ground, which seems remarkable even for an experienced pilot.
Right. As a matter of fact, we cover that on our website. Hani Hanjour, the alleged Muslim hijackers that supposedly piloted American 77, it came in from the west, and at 7,000 feet is when it commenced this descending, accelerating 330-degree corkscrew turn to arrive precisely at ground level without striking the surface at over 500 miles per hour. Now, we've got a 5-minute video on the website that was produced by Jesse Ventura's company when they were doing conspiracy theory. And it was an interview with Rob Balsamo, the co-founder of another grassroots group called Pilots for 9/11 Truth. And in that, Rob talks about Hani Hanjour. That's what the whole 5-minute video is about. And he describes how just 1 month prior to 9/11, Hanjour tried to rent a Cessna 172 from an airport in Maryland, and they refused to rent it to him because he couldn't handle it. He couldn't take off or land the airplane. And then the last half of the video, another friend of mine, Rusty Amer, who's a highly qualified pilot, was in a simulator with a young pilot who had comparable experience to Hani Hanjour. And he attempts this maneuver 3 separate times, and every time he tried it, he crashed. So at the end of the video, Rusty says to him, "You couldn't do it, and I couldn't do it either." And what happened was a number of experienced pilots got in and attempted this maneuver, and every time they tried it, they crashed, with the exception of one I heard, a captain named Philip Marshall, on his 20th attempt, was able to hit just the building, not down at the surface like he did. So we believe that the target, whatever it was the Naval Intelligence Center, and you can get into that later as to why that was important. But I hear 4 different theories out there. 1, American Airlines 77 hit the Pentagon. 2, there was no airplane there, it was a missile. 3, there was an airplane there with a missile, as Phil McConnell believes, that fired the missile, but it wasn't a Boeing 757. And the 4th one was there was just explosives inside the building with no airborne vehicle at all. So we don't address that on our website. We're just attacking the hijackers.
So to come back to the core area that you're covering, then I discovered about the uninterruptible autopilot from Field McConnell initially. He spoke at one of the UK column events. And it was a very striking presentation about just how powerful this is and how little the pilots and the rest of the airline industry actually knew about the capabilities of what they were flying. So perhaps you could expand on how you discovered about this device, what it does, and also what is generally known, or was generally known at the time, about the capability of the uninterruptible autopilot.
Well, in the after 9/11, I established a global grassroots effort called Whistleblowing Airline Employees Association, and it was before Facebook and social media took off. So it was really a big email network, and we asked people to forward the email to other people. And I had put out the word as to how I was terminated. I had an affidavit that I sent out to a lot of people. And in 2006, out of the clear blue, somehow Phil McConnell got my phone number and he called me. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and introduced himself. And at that time, he told me he was reporting illegal modifications on Boeing aircraft, and that the Federal Aviation Administration, Northwest Airlines, where he was a DC-10 captain, and the Airline Pilots Association, his union, this will sound familiar, but they were attempting to get him to see a notorious quack shrink in LA named Dr. James Elliott, because they were going to do the same thing that they did to me on him, give him a bogus diagnosis. And I said, Phil, don't go, it's a setup. So Phil retired a couple days later so he could serve as an expert witness in future litigation, which he did file later on, and he's planning on doing it again. But anyhow, it wasn't until several months into it, I introduced, do you know who David Hawkins is?
No.
Oh, okay, that's the sidekick of Fields. Okay, I introduced the two. David came to me first, and he was looking for a pilot, preferably a fighter pilot, and I was engaged in something else at the time, and I couldn't help him out. And a couple days later, Phil contacted me, and I married him by email, and they worked for 5 years, and I was on their email network, so I was daily, we were exchanging emails, and when it eventually was exposed regarding this uninterruptible autopilot, really it was my aha moment, because I knew these guys couldn't do it, and when he told me the capabilities of the system, I went, so that's how they did it. That's how they did it. So that's how I came to know about it. But I will tell you, and we really haven't gotten into what our organization is doing, but we're recruiting pilots from around the world to get recorded testimony from them that back my assertions that I made at the beginning of the program. And without exception, every pilot we've contacted are totally clueless regarding this uninterruptible autopilot. They didn't even know it existed.
It's still not known?
No.
Okay. So you described its capabilities. Could you outline those for us?
Well, I can't go into detail. Phil could better address this than I could, but there's 2 flight management computers on the airplane that I pointed out before. And what they are, they have all the navigation system, and they receive inputs from inertial reference units, air data computers, and a number of radios on the airplane. And that's how the cruise missile accuracy is derived. But information can be externally uplinked into those computers. And that's what occurred. The autopilot is taken away from the pilots, and the navigation information is uplinked into the flight management computers, and away it goes. Now, if you Google Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot, you'll get a Wikipedia article, and it's labeled as such. And it's misleading because it says that Boeing patented this in 2006 after 9/11. And that is true, they did. But we have solid proof that this system was developed in as late as 1997, prior to 9/11. And that evidence is given on our website by an audio recording of Rob Balsamo interviewing an avionics technician who actually worked on this system prior to in 1996, 1997. So if you listen to that audio, you'd see that there's 4 ways one way of engaging an autopilot, and that's turning the switch on, okay? There's 4 ways of disengaging it. Turning the switch off, there's a little red button on the yoke or the steering wheel of the airplane you can press. You can apply a 70-pound or greater force on the yoke, or you can pull the circuit breaker on the system. Well, once this system is engaged, none of that works. Even if you pull every circuit breaker in the airplane, you can't disengage this uninterruptible autopilot system. And I can only imagine the horror that these pilots experienced when suddenly their airplane made an erratic turn and starts heading towards New York. And it also somehow shuts off the radios and the aircraft transponder, which air traffic control uses to identify aircraft. So this system does exist. It existed prior to 9/11, and we assert that it was employed and that these hijackers couldn't have flown the airplane.
If we could move on to the sort of broader movement, I'm obviously being a structural engineer, I'm aware of all the work that Richard Gage is doing in Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and the research and structural analysis work that's gone into Building 7, for example. But I'm also less well aware that there are legal moves afoot, and that the the pilot 9/11 Truth effort is factoring into that as well. So if you could give me your overview of where you see the 9/11 movement as a whole, and where the sort of ongoing legal challenges are as far as you know.
Well, right now the only legal act on the planet was initiated by a group called the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And what happened was this group of lawyers in the United States got together with the biggest 9/11 whistleblowers in the world that consisted of Richard Gage and his architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, scientists, police, firemen, and other people that had information. And they compiled 57 evidence packages, and they presented it to the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, Jeffrey Berman. And based on the evidence they presented him, he had no choice but to convene a grand jury investigation into their allegations that World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7 were brought down by controlled demolition and not by jet aircraft impact damages or the jet fuel fires that ensued. So what's happening right now is the Justice Department's dragging their feet because it looks like there's no action that's been taken. So the Lawyers Committee is moving forward with suits to try to move the thing forward. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, but they, you're smiling, they were contracted by the government to investigate the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, and they concluded that it was brought down by a few office fires. Well, it's been proven, for those that aren't familiar with Building 7, it came down at 5:20 in the afternoon at nearly the free fall acceleration of gravity in less than 7 seconds due to the office fires. So I'll point out that never in the 100-year history of steel reinforced high-rise office fires has any ever collapsed due to fire, and on 9/11, 3 did. So what the University of Alaska conducted a 3 or 4 year study and released a paper several months ago, and it conclusively proves that all, I think it's 44 structural beams collapsed simultaneously on Building 7 as it pancaked down to a pile of rubble 1 story tall in less than 7 seconds.
The analysis by the university was very striking. Yeah, and it showed that the only way, because they modeled the building with a very refined model, and then they ran various scenarios to see if they could get the model to behave as the building had on 9/11. Now, this was a collapse, which you quite rightly say was a free fall acceleration. It started with the central portion of the building going first, and then the outer columns going immediately thereafter. And the only way they could get their model to behave in the same manner that the building had done was to sever all of the columns more or less simultaneously, a slight delay with the central ones going first, which is of course controlled demolition. And no other scenario that they run any sort of fire. The reason I was smiling when you said NIST is NIST, after years of head scratching, because FEMA did a report on Building 7 as well, and they came up with another explanation to do with a diesel fuel store being on fire and a cut-off having failed and fed fuel into this fire. That one didn't have any traction. So NIST, after years of trying, came up with their explanation, which was based on thermal expansion and a very dubious set of modeling assumptions to try and show that you had a progressive collapse of this building due to one beam being pushed off its bearing by the expansion of another beam. So I would have to say that the modeling effort from Alaska was far superior to what we know about the NIST model, because of course the NIST model is still classified. And raised enormous technical concerns over the official 9/11 story. technical concerns that have not been reported in the mainstream media, let alone addressed by the authorities.
Yes.
So at the moment, there was a grand jury. A grand jury was actually.
Well, it's supposedly underway, but none of the witnesses have been called in, and they see no movement whatsoever, and it's been several months. So the way we dovetail in with the lawyers committee, I've talked several times with the board of directors, of which Richard Gage is on. Dave Meismichael is their chairman, and Mick Harrison, their chief litigator, and I just talked to him several weeks ago. They're not representing 9/11 pilot whistleblowers legally. They're not even endorsing yet what we're saying. They're remaining neutral, and they say they have to right now. So what we're doing is video recording these pilots' testimony and forwarding it to Mick Harrison for review and to vet these pilots. And if we can get a sufficient number of pilots, all of who qualify as expert witnesses, to step forward with their testimony that resembles mine, then they're going to present this evidence to a U.S. attorney in hopes that they'll convene a grand jury investigation into our allegations. So that's where we stand with the lawyers committee.
Okay. What I'd like to do, just to finish off, if we may, is to find out what you know about Field McConnell, because we know that he's been arrested and he's now been held for some considerable time. We've been getting positive feedback about how he actually is, but perhaps you'll know more. You could give us an update on how he's keeping and the status of his legal fight.
Okay. I don't know how much listeners know about him or what happened to him, but he kind of broke away from me in 9/11. We still kept in touch, of course, but he got involved with child trafficking and pedophilia that led him to Broward County, Florida, and a lawyer down there named Kim Picasio. And he had his TV program online, and he was broadcasting this information about Kim Picasio, and she went to the judge and got a restraining order imposed on him that prevented him from doing that, and somehow he violated it. And this judge ordered him to be extradited from his home in Plum City, Wisconsin to Broward County. He ordered him to be arrested, and he was. And he was in jail in Plum City fighting this. And the governor of Wisconsin finally said, "That's it, you're going to be extradited." So they sent him down to Florida, I believe on a bus, and he wound up in jail there for a couple months while the lawyers were appealing his case. And ultimately, they had him on 3 felony accounts, and I heard that he stood to serve 3 to 5 years in prison for them. But this Kim Picasio supposedly has dropped 2 of them, so it's down to 1 charge. And the lawyers were successful in procuring his release, and he's now under house arrest wearing an ankle bracelet, living with his son in Broward County, and they've cut him off electronically. They've got a gag order on him. He can't when his wife calls him, which is the only person that can contact him, a lawyer has to be present for the phone call. But as far as getting on a computer or using a cell phone, he can't do it. So I am in contact with a woman in London, as a matter of fact, and another Jen in Sweden, who have almost daily contact with Denise, his wife. And I just called yesterday because I knew we were going to discuss this today to get an update on him. And I got photographs of him, and he's got a Florida sunshine tan and a big smile on his face. He looks real healthy, and he's doing well. And he's just awaiting a hearing. They did have a hearing set up a couple months ago, and then the COVID scare hit, and they canceled the thing. So that's as much as I know, that he's doing well health-wise and otherwise, and he looked happy. So in one picture, he had a hammer, so walking towards the camera. So.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm delighted to hear he's well.
Yeah.
And bearing up under all of the trouble that he's going through. So hopefully we'll be able to see him once again in the UK before too long.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you very much for briefing us today on the work of your organisation. and on the ongoing fight to discover exactly what happened in 9/11. We're coming up to the anniversary once again, and it's vital that we don't let this be forgotten, because it's one of the key moves that's changed our society from the one that we thought we were in, the one that we grew up in with all of its problems, to something much more sinister, something where truth is no longer something that you aspire to. It becomes a revolutionary act, as Orwell put it. It becomes something that you pay for, as you have and as Field has, and it becomes something that you have to fight for. So it's a different world, and 9/11 was one of the big milestones along the way. So we need to keep the voices being raised for truth and honesty about what exactly happened, and support those like you who work towards that end. So thank you for your work, and thank you very much for your time today. And I hope that you too get to be reunited with Field very soon.
Yes, I intend to interview him as soon as they release him. So he's one of our expert witnesses, especially with regard to the autopilot. And I want to thank you, David, for having me on the program. And if I could just mention real quick, if you do go to our website, 911pilots.org, at the top of the page, there's a Join Us tab. And all we need is your name and email address, and we can put you on our emailing list to keep you updated on our progress as we move along.
Super. Dan, thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.